Okay, so hopefully this will work out. We are looking at 8.2 and 8.3. Hopefully this won't be like a super choppy video. Sometimes they're choppy. What you're going to be doing is you need to have out your study guide, which you already got in class. And if you, for some reason, don't have your 8.2 and 8.3, ask for another copy from the sub so that you know exactly what you need to do. So we're looking at a follow-up to what you would have read about yesterday with the Whiskey Rebellion. So we're looking at on 8.2, what exactly is happening with the Whiskey Rebellion. So hopefully what you were able to pull out from your reading yesterday is that Alexander Hamilton, we know, has come to the realization you can't run a country without money. You have to have money. And when you have to have money, you have to have a way to get money. And what's the only way that we can get money? Taxes. So, of course, everybody freaks out. They're like, this is exactly why we broke away from Britain in the first place, because we had taxes. So if we are going to have taxes, how is that going to make our country run better? Let's talk about the reality. You can't have a president who doesn't get a paycheck. You can't have a secretary of war to run a military without the finances to pay the military, to have weapons. One of the things we really don't have is an established Navy. We still have those privateers. You know, you and your buddies have a gun and some hunting rifles, and so you get to join the Army. We can't pay people to be in the House and Senate or our Supreme Court justices if we don't have money. So we have to have money. So one thing that Alexander Hamilton looked to do was to compromise with people. How are we going to pay for these taxes? Where are they going to come from? And he decided that the taxes, let's start slow. Let's just tax luxuries. So in some of your classes, we talked about luxuries the other day. Luxuries are things that we want, not things we need. So you want Mountain Dew, but you don't need it. You need water or milk. So we go to the store today, and if you went to the Dandy and it says that the Mountain Dew is going to cost you 99 cents, you're going to pay $1.05. You pay $1.05 because there's 6% tax on luxuries in Pennsylvania. So 6 cents on top of the 99 takes you to the $1.05. And he figured we can just tax the things that are not necessary. So he looked at whiskey as a luxury. And so here we are. We are looking at farmers going, wait, what do you mean that whiskey is a luxury? And it wasn't so much the whiskey was a luxury. What he's looking at is that the whiskey was not necessary, but the farmers were using their extra grains to make whiskey. So anything they didn't use, they could ferment, they could turn around, they can have whiskey, and then they were trading with their neighbors. So this is a time period that's full of barter. And the idea behind barter is that you would look at your neighbors and say to your neighbors, okay, guess what? I have grain. I can trade you grain and some beef for milk and cheese that you have. Or you could go down to the store and you could trade with whoever has the local merchant store, kind of like Tim and the Meeker family in our story. You might go down there and be like, okay, I need salt and I need spices and I need flour, and I'm going to trade you grain or whiskey that I have so that they could run their tavern. So to farmers, this was not a luxury. This was part of their life. So they decided they weren't going to pay the taxes. So they refused. And they refused to pay the taxes. And then the tax collectors got sent there and they greeted the tax collectors. Now, one thing you would have picked up is that the first rebellion in the United States wasn't civil war. It was angry farmers in Pennsylvania. So these angry farmers in Pennsylvania turn around and they greet the tax collectors, and they've got pitchforks and they've got shovels, and they make these, they're called epitaphs. So basically think of like a scarecrow. So you've got this scarecrow that we're going to dress up to look like a tax collector. And then when the tax collector comes to town, we're going to set that baby on fire. We want them to see like, hey, guess what? Here you go. This could be you. Because we know about the tarring and feathering and things that happened to tax collectors before. Western Pennsylvania wanted to let them know that they were not intimidated. They were absolutely going to take out those tax collectors. So 500 farmers greet the tax collectors. Tax collectors come. They've got a confrontation, and Washington, he gets notice. Now, remember we talked about that there were reasons he didn't want to be the president. And one was because when everybody mucked this country up and made a big mess of it, then they were going to turn around and go, look at Washington, couldn't control it. And he didn't want the blame. He was like, seriously? Like already Western Pennsylvania is causing this problem? So not only were they attacking the tax collectors, but the people in Western Pennsylvania decided that they were going to declare themselves their own country. Okay, really? So you're going to declare yourself your own country, and we're going to have our own flag, and we're changing the language. We're going to speak French in our country of Western Pennsylvania. And Washington was like fuming. He was fuming because remember we talked about the whole Bill of Rights and making sure people had rights. He knew that you don't always agree with government. So if you don't agree with government, do it the right way. So what is the right way? What does the right way look like? Okay, we need to go out and tell them. So if there was one thing Washington was good at, it was at leading the military. So he decided he's going to go for a little ride, and he's going to get on his horse, and he is going to ride out to Western Pennsylvania so that he can have a conversation with them about how do we handle displeasure with our government in Pennsylvania. So he does. He takes a couple of his friends, and he shows up to where there's 500 angry farmers are out west. And the 500 farmers are like, yeah, we got pitchforks. We're going to take this on. And then over the hill comes Washington with a few of his friends, like 13,000 of his friends. He brings 13,000 soldiers to Western Pennsylvania with him. And when he gets there, he was just like, yeah, see, you brought some friends. I brought some friends too. And so let's have a conversation about how this is supposed to look. And he reminded them that what they have in their First Amendment right is the freedom of speech. You're not happy, then say you're not happy. And second, freedom of petition. If you're in the First Amendment, you have that right to petition the government to say, we're not in agreement with how you're handling this, and we want you to reconsider. So you could have freedom of speech, you could have freedom of petition, you could even write articles in the newspaper, but guess what you can't do? You can't turn around and attack the tax collectors and then call that justified. You cannot start a rebellion and decide you're going to have your own country. So he decides that he's going to explain to them, here's the process moving forward. So you've got two choices moving forward. One, you can follow the Constitution, which we took great care to make sure you still have those rights. Or two, my friends are just going to go ahead and take you over and make sure that this is taken care of the right way. So 500 versus 13,000, like smart people, Western Pennsylvania was like, yeah, let's reconsider this. Let's do this a little bit differently. So they decide they're going to change their mind and do it the right way. So the Whiskey Rebellion, short-lived moment for the people of Pennsylvania to think they're going to declare themselves their own country. So we're going to go ahead to the 8.2. We're going to work on that question that you have on your paper. Going to write some of these things down and make sure you get them on your paper. I'll move out of your way so you can see them. So we want to know what's the significance of the Whiskey Rebellion. So we know that we've got taxes on luxuries. So we've got those taxes on luxuries, and we know that our farmers are living by bartering. So they're trading. So to them, they don't see this as a luxury. They see this as a trade that's necessary. So it's not like people are really getting a whole lot of cash back then. People are going to be using that. So then we know we're going to have these tax collectors that get sent, and they're going to attack tax collectors. So these tax collectors are going to be greeted by angry farmers with pitchforks. So we've got these angry farmers with the pitchforks that they're going to go ahead and have this confrontation with them. And then we know that Washington is going to greet those 500 angry farmers with 13,000 of his own friends to have a discussion about the proper way that this country is designed to let your government know when you're not happy. Lift it a little bit, maybe. So remember, these Western PA farmers declare their own country. Declare own country. $13,000 soldiers are going to go with Washington. To put down the rebellion. So we have, at this point, taxes, that the taxes are going to be placed on the luxuries. We've got farmers who are earning by trading goods back and forth. There's that barter. And barter is B-A-R-T-E-R. So they're going to barter their goods. And then we have that the tax collectors go to try to collect the taxes, and they're greeted by these angry farmers with their pitchforks and burning the effigy scarecrows. And so those 500 protesters are going to be the ones who spearhead Western Pennsylvania declaring their own country, having their own flag, speaking French, all that kind of good stuff, when they are then greeted by Washington and 13,000 of his soldiers to go ahead and put down the rebellion and remind them that the Bill of Rights have a proper method for making this happen. So that's going to be your Whiskey Rebellion. Take a moment, make sure you have all those pieces down so that we can scroll up and go to the next one. So a couple of things are going to happen here too. So in the meantime, not only is this taking place, because remember we said Washington didn't want blame and all kinds of crazy things were going to happen. We had some issues where France is mad because we're trading with England, and England's mad because we're trading with France. And so everybody just starts stealing our ships. We are still kind of taking place in that whole triangular trade and sending goods out to the European countries, in addition to what's happening in India, because people want to buy the lumber that we talked about, or buy the furs that they're trading and trapping, because we've got all these animals that aren't being offered in other places, the fish that we are catching, and all the seafood that's coming from New England. So we've got all those goods that are being taken. And so all of a sudden they turn around and we start having these battles where everybody starts not just stealing our ships, but they're stealing our stuff. And then anybody who's on board, they're like, oh, you're going to be a sailor in our Navy, especially the British, because they're like, oh, you guys talk with British accents. You're probably British sailors that escaped. Well, everybody still speaks with a British accent. The United States hasn't existed long enough to really come up with its own lingo yet, and our own form of language. So we're going to have that our ships start getting impressed, and that's going to create a problem. And then on top of that, the last piece that's really kind of driving Washington crazy is that Hamilton, his right-hand man, Department of Treasury, who started the Federalist Party, is fighting with Thomas Jefferson, who is his other kind of right-hand man in charge of Secretary of State, who started the People's Party, that anti-Federalist Party. And so Hamilton and Jefferson are fighting over what rights people should have, how the government should pursue, but they're doing it publicly. there was this set of documents you can look up called the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, where and even in newspapers where they're battling back and forth and they're name calling each other. And Washington's like, oh my God, I told you I didn't want to do this. Now he does have a second term in office in the midst of all this. So now we have Western Pennsylvania is trying to break away. France is stealing our ships. Britain's stealing our ships. And now these three department heads, and two of them are fighting. And so Hamilton and Jefferson are battling back and forth and name calling. And Washington sits them down. And he's like, guys, seriously, you're making me look like a fool. This is ridiculous. We can't have this. And anyway, they keep telling him like, oh, well, Jefferson's all about like telling the people they can have all these rights. How am I supposed to make any money? And he's like, Jefferson's arguing, well, Hamilton's just taking money from all the regular people. We can't have that. And so they would just continue to insult each other in public. And I'm sure you see it all the time today because, the internet and the news. When our politicians are fighting and name calling each other constantly on the news, it looks embarrassing. And Washington was like, I'm going to tell you both right now, seriously, as long as you two work for me, you're going to cut it out and you're going to act like grown-ups and you're going to stop humiliating each other in public, because you're not just humiliating each other, you're humiliating me. As long as you work for me, you got to cut it out. So then they were like, well, then if I have to work with him and be nice, I'm just going to quit. Well, if he's quitting, I'm quitting. And so Jefferson and Hamilton both quit. So Washington's like, great, I have 3 departments and 2 of my department heads quit because they are acting like babies. I told you I didn't want this job. I told you this was going to be bad. And so add that to my list. And then Congress was like, hey, we were thinking, wouldn't it be super cool if you did a 3rd term in office? And Washington's like, no part of this is cool. No part of this is exciting. So no to a 3rd term in office, because now we see the beginning of political parties. And he did not want that. He did not want there to be a split among the American people. He wanted there to be a collaboration. And my people are embarrassing me, and I have a rebellion taking place, and I have ships being stolen. So no, I don't want to have a 3rd term in office. And so today, our presidents only have 2 terms of office. And that became a constitutional amendment that we added later. It wasn't always that way, but during World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was our president, and Roosevelt was a great leader, and he was really well respected by the people. And he's the one that was in a wheelchair. He had polio. And anyway, Roosevelt was elected to a 4th term of office. And then he got sick from the polio and he died. And the American people were like, whew, okay, so 4 terms might be too much, because we start to lose the idea of a democracy with 4 terms in office. The idea is that any person could become president and that we'd have this constant change in command, which would keep there from ever being a time where we become more of a dictatorship or anything else where one person does get in control. And our question in the chapter 7 was, how do we keep any one person or branch from getting out of control? First, it's the 3 kids in the backseat of the car. The second thing is by limiting the terms of our president. And so when Roosevelt died, they decided that if 2 terms in office was good enough for George Washington, it should be good enough for anybody else. And so we have a 2-term president. So impressments, one of your vocab words, is the idea of having our ships stolen and forcing the sailors into the fleet, which we'll see with Britain and France, and this is going to continue even into the next chapter. That turned out terrible. So this is going to be when another country is going to steal your ships, your sailors, and your stuff and force them into their navy so that they can take access and take control of the goods. And then Washington, why is he refusing a 3rd term? He's angry about the political parties. And he is not so happy with Hamilton and Jefferson. Now, mind you, Hamilton and Jefferson quit as cabinet members for Washington as the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury, but they don't quit politics. They are both very active in politics, and we're going to see that carry over into our next chapter. And so when we see this, that he refuses a third term, this is going to set a precedence. And precedence, precedence, that's going to be like a tradition. So we see that it's become a tradition. We see the same thing where like typically a president will meet with his cabinet at least one time a week, and that's a precedent. So we start to see these traditions that are going to take place. Except for now, we've actually put it in the Constitution, so we don't have to worry about that. All right, so anyway, he gave this big farewell address, and every year on his birthday, they read it in the House and Senate, and they hear like all of the wisdom that he has to offer to the United States moving forward, and it's available online if you wanted to see that. So that's the end of what we have for 8.2. You are going to flip and go to the other side for 8.3, so we can fill out the chart on the other side. So election of 1796, when Washington refuses to take a third term in office, what we see take place is that we are going to see those same Federalists and Anti-Federalists running against each other. First time that we're going to have political parties that are going to run against each other. But the Federalists, even though Hamilton really started that party, they decided they weren't going to run Hamilton. They're going to run John Adams instead. He had served as the vice president under Washington. If Washington thought he was good enough to be second in command, he's probably a good choice. He's a little bit more, he's quiet. He's kind of neutral. John Adams is actually not a big fan of meeting with people. He likes to do his work privately. He's not going to be the guy who's turning around and having all these big speeches in public and bad-mouthing the other side. So they think that he might be a good take. So they decide they're going to have John Adams. And then the Anti-Federalists, which then become a new party. They're going to, instead of be anti, because that sounds negative, they're going to call themselves the Democratic Republicans. And those Democratic Republicans, they're going to choose, of course, Thomas Jefferson. So Adams and Jefferson are going to run against each other. And we're going to see that people, just like we talked about party platforms, people are going to have a position. They're going to become partisan. Which part or side of the issue do you favor? And so when we look at what's happening with these political parties, this is nothing different than what we did in chapter 7. You're going to see that the same kinds of issues we talked about before are going to be happening again. So what kind of perspectives are John Adams and Thomas Jefferson going to be putting out there for the people? So of course, we know Hamilton is he's still going to be active. He's going to be pushing this Federalist Party. And we know that the Federalists want to have a strong federal government. They believe in that federal government having that big bottom piece of cake, right? So they are still sticking to what we already know is true. You can't turn around and have the basis of the government be 13 individual states, because 13 states, if 2 or 3 of them start to fail, the whole thing's going to collapse. We talked about that. So we're still looking at that same perspective. You still have to have a perspective where you're going to have one strong government. And Hamilton's going to continue to push that. We know also from last chapter that the kind of people that are going to join this party are going to be wealthy people and educated people. Because they have money and influence and the ability to have a say. And they think that as educated people with money, they're smarter than the average farmer or blacksmith or farrier or store owner. They think that, as someone who's well educated, I have the knowledge to make decisions on behalf of all of you. And so there really becomes this attitude of we're better than you are, we're smarter than you are, and don't worry, we will take care of all of you uneducated people. And not that they pushed it that way, but the other party, those Democratic Republican people, they are feeling that that's the message that's being conveyed. So wealthy, educated people. And as wealthy, educated people, they believe that the best way to make money is back to that idea of those tariffs, right? Because we said tariffs are taxes on imports. And why are we having taxes on imports? Because if you tax things coming from other countries on that triangular trade that's still happening, or goods that are being sent from Europe, if people are taxed and have to pay more for those goods than our goods, they'll buy our goods from our businesses because we are the wealthy business owners. So who's that up against? And it's going to be up against Jefferson and all the regular ordinary Joes that we talked about before. So let's just look at that first column, some of the things that are going to be under the Federalist Party. So again, back to partisan, you have to choose which part. So when we're talking part, it's like which side of the chart are you going to be on? Which side is going to be something that you're going to favor? So partisan is going to be to choose. Oops, I guess I have to hit the button here. Hold on. So we're going to choose which side of the issue are we going to favor. And again, can people jump back and forth? Can they say, okay, I see this and I agree with the Federalists on this, and then I agree with the Democratic Republicans on this? Absolutely. They can jump back and forth if they want to do that. So the political parties themselves, we've got the two columns. And remember, these Democratic Republicans, this is just the new name for those anti-federalists that we talked about last chapter. So we've got the anti-federalists. Who are our leaders? Again, who's going to be the people in charge of our Federalist Party? Still going to be Hamilton, who we know. And then we're going to see John Adams because they're going to try to push him out there as like a neutral, calmer alternative to Hamilton, somebody who's going to be more like Washington. So they're hoping people will buy into the idea that Adams is going to be just like Washington. And what type of government is he going to support? Of course, the strong federal government. So again, remember that this Federalist, that's going to be all those ideas behind what has to do with supporting the federal government, that big base, right? And who do we want to rule the government? Those wealthy, educated people. Those are going to be the ones that we want to go ahead and handle making sure that they take care of the people who don't have the knowledge base that they have, who don't have the finances, so on and so forth. So the wealthy and the educated. Heading over to the other column. So looking at the other column, we know it's going to be the opposite. So Hamilton and John Adams, we know we're going to be facing Jefferson. We know that that's going to be part of it. And if these guys want a strong federal government, then these guys want strong state government, right? They're going to want the states to be in charge, even though we know that we come up with that compromise where they're going to share that federalism we talked about before, where we agree to kind of balance it out between state and federal government, but they still think that the state governments should be in charge. And then who do they think should rule over the government? Us. right? The regular, ordinary people, your local townsmen, your farmers, the people who fought for this country, the people who went to the revolution and put their lives on the line, the people who may not have the book smarts, but it doesn't mean that they're not wise and have a lot to contribute to the conversation. So they're going to be looking at the regular, ordinary, average Joes, your farmers, your blacksmiths, your store owners, anyone who comes from a regular, ordinary background should be the people who are going to be running this country because they wanted this country the most. So we'll change colors here to make it a little bit easier. So over here, we know those anti-federalists are now Democratic Republicans. They're going to be led by Jefferson. We want strong state governments. And like regular people, your farmers, your business owners. But like store owners, right? So small businesses, I guess it's easier to put small businesses, maybe your town blacksmith. Just ordinary people. Right? So ordinary, regular Joes are going to be the guys who are going to be part of this Democratic Republican Party. So we know that that's going to be our first part of the contrast. We're going to look underneath at how we're going to be making money and some of the other questions. And again, these should be things that you're already feeling pretty comfortable with and pretty familiar with, because this is just going to be a good link and follow-up to what we already talked about with how government got set up. And then obviously, here we are in Chapter 8, setting it up for the first time based on stuff that you learned about in Chapter 7. All right, so the next part. What are we going to do next? So we have to make money as a country. So how are we going to make money? We talked a little bit about the fact that the wealthy business people, those federalists, are all going to be in favor of tariffs. Let's make sure we tax money coming from other countries. Taxes on especially the luxuries, right? So things that people want that we would be producing. And then American businesses, they feel that American businesses are going to be making enough money to support this country. And we know that things are just getting started because we talked about that we're going to move into Chapter 9 and then into Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is going to be where you're doing your factory projects. And so we know factories will start to open and that will make a difference. How do the Democratic Republicans want to make money? The answer is they really have no clue. They have no idea how they're going to pay for an army or the president or their congressman. They have no idea how they're going to make money, but they want free trade. They don't want to pay money on the whiskey they're trading for beef to feed their families, or the whiskey they sell to the meeker taverns so that they can trade the whiskey for shoes for their children. So they don't have a plan yet. They just know that they don't want to have to pay taxes on those things. And now we're also looking at Secretary of State's job, remember, is to make allies with countries. And we have our ships being stolen. And so we're trying to figure out who should we be allies with? And of course, the people of France helped us become our own country. And so the Democratic Republicans, the ordinary Joes who fought side by side with them, are like, this is a logical choice. France helped us become our own country. France should be our go-to. That's who we should be relying on. And so we think we're going to rely on them. But the Federalists are like, whoa, but wait, let's talk about the fact that although we defeated them, Britain's a great superpower, and they have the most powerful navy still in the world. And so perhaps we should be debating becoming friends with Britain. And of course, the average Joes are freaking out, going, are you kidding me? Like they shot at us. They tried to kill us. And they ruled over us and taxed us to the point of the people of Boston starving. Like they wouldn't even let them get food. And you want to be friends with those guys? Yeah, we should totally be friends with them. So here we are. We're in this debate about who should be our ally. And then we talked a little bit on Wednesday. I'm trying to think what today still is for me. About how we're going to handle money. And we know that we already talked about the logic of a national bank, that Hamilton looked at it and said, okay, having different money in different states is just going to be ridiculous. How are you going to trade between states if you have different money? But the Democratic Republicans are a little worried about the federal government controlling their money. And then all of a sudden, the Federalists are like, oh, no, they wouldn't control it. They would share the power with the wealthy business owners. Oh, yeah, because that's totally going to make me feel better. So there's this debate. And so believe it or not, we actually start out with national banks and state banks because there is no agreement about how to handle the money. So we're going to see that money gets handled that way. And the people that join the party, of course, you know it, wealthy people for the Federalists. New England is going to be where all those factories and those big businesses get started. And so John Adams, remember John Adams, Sam Adams, all those guys were like Bostonians during the Boston Tea Party in the beginning of Revolution. New England is going to be where all those factories get started. So those New Englanders are going to be in favor of it. And then big plantation owners. We're seeing the beginning of big tobacco plantations and rice plantations in the South. And those guys have big bucks, right? Because we know that they're going to continue to buy slaves up until 1808. And then the United States is like, all right, well, yeah, let's not buy anymore. We'll just breed the people that we've already purchased, because that's a better plan. But anyway, they want to go ahead and run the country based on wealthy people. And so who are going to be the people that are going to be in our Democratic Republicans? Farmers, working class, regular people. And they want to make sure that the regular people continue to have a say in what's happening. And then we're going to talk a little bit about powers at the bottom here in a second. So let's get these couple in here. So we know, how are we going to make money? These guys want taxes and tariffs. And their American businesses as their sources of money. Oh my goodness. Guess I'm writing too quick for it here. We also know that they want to be allies with Britain. That's making lots of people happy. And we should have a national bank. And that wealthy big business and big plantation owners are all going to think this is a fabulous idea. On the other side, what do we have? Pretty much the opposite of everything we just put down. They have no clue how they're going to make money. But remember, they want free trade. They want to be allies with France. They want to have state banks. And we're looking at farmers, working class, average Joes kind of people. Okay, so looking at that, again, we talked about this a little bit before, about reading into the Constitution that Hamilton was in favor of using implied powers, right? I for implied means I to interpret, like coining money. We talked about coining money before, and the idea of having a paycheck that's $100 when you work at Walmart and then having to get 400 quarters would be totally impractical. So he said, hey, times could change. So let's be a little bit flexible about how we read it, kind of like a rubber band, stretch it out. But Jefferson's like, whoa, absolutely not. We want it written exactly as it is in the Constitution. If that's what you want it to be, then put that down. And so he believed in the express powers, the idea of it being exactly as it says in the Constitution. So we've got those two pieces here. So one wants it implied, one wants it expressed, and they're going to continue to debate that. So back in those days, kind of like our electoral college, right? So we have votes that are going to take place. And so they're going to run against each other, Adams and Jefferson, based on these perspectives that you put in your chart. So we have the election of 1796. And at that time, the people that were voting on the behalf, it's gonna be your House and Senate members that are going to vote for you at this point. And so they're looking at how this is working, and they're split. They're pretty closely aligned, and they look at it and they're like, okay, I can see why this would be a good method. And then you have some people going, okay, really? Allies with Britain? No way, man. We're gonna be allies with France. We can't possibly align with them. And so they see that little bit of insanity that's there. And then you have people saying, okay, yeah, but we're educated. We could definitely make decisions. Yeah, but the farmers, they fought for us, and so they vote, and it couldn't be any closer. So they look at it, and Adams gets 71 votes and Jefferson gets 68 votes. So it's 71 to 68. So definitely at 71 versus 68, as close it possibly can be. So because Adams wins 71 votes, John Adams becomes the second president of the United States. But back then, you didn't have somebody run to become vice president. Whoever had the second most votes became the vice president. And so with 71 votes, we have Adams as the president, and with 68 votes, we have Jefferson is going to be the vice president. So two men who don't agree on anything, who have completely different perspectives, are now going to become the next president and vice president. And it was an epic mess, which we will talk about in the next section. So anyway, Constitution requires it. If you get the most votes, you're president. If you get second most votes, you're vice president. And then Jefferson's looking at it going, seriously, I've got to work for the guy that I don't agree with on anything. And they're like, yeah, that's what it says. So it ends up leading to the next 4 years of complete turmoil. Think about like Hamilton and Jefferson hated each other so much politically that they both quit. They couldn't even stand to work together. And now Jefferson's got to be the vice president for somebody who he disagrees with just as much as he disagrees with Hamilton. He does not quit, just in case you're wondering. He does not quit as the vice president. But it makes for 4 years of complete chaos. So looking down here at the bottom, what happens in that election of 1796? Adams gets 71 votes. Jefferson gets 68. Adams is going to be the president. Jefferson is the vice president because the Constitution requires him to. Okay, so if my timing is right, you have like maybe 2 or 3 minutes to make sure that your stuff is wrapped up. These papers must go in the turn-in bin. You have to turn them in. If you didn't turn it in, you didn't do it. Make sure your name is on it. You should have put freezing here. Sorry, I saw that it was frozen. So anyway, it needs to be in the in bin. If you didn't turn it in, it didn't happen. You should have put yesterday's paper in. If you didn't turn it in, it didn't happen for period 6 and 8. Make sure that you're taking care of business, because these are easy points that you shouldn't be throwing away since we did it together. And I will see you guys on Monday. I hope you have a great weekend.